Hello, everybody. I'm going to share my screen with you guys for our presentation. All right. So, my name is Emma Crane. I don't know if everyone else wants to introduce themselves.
I'm Carly.
And I'm Denisse.
And today we're going to be talking to you guys about social media, stress, and the developing brain. So, first of all, we're going to talk about toxic stress, and y'all may be asking what's the difference between toxic stress and normal stress. And according to the Harvard Center on the Developing Child, toxic stress occurs when there's an excessive or prolonged exposure to material that causes an activation in stress response systems in the brain and body. And unlike everyday stress that's temporary and manageable, toxic stress happens when children repeat or experience repeated exposure to harmful situations without enough support in place to help them cope with it. And today, one major source of that exposure is unrestricted access to the internet and social media. So, children and adolescents are constantly being exposed to harmful content, cyberbullying, and violent, unrealistic, or inappropriate material. And that unrestricted access to social media is exposing youth to damaging content that's physically altering their brain, and it impacts the development and can cause the onset and persistence of toxic stress.
When discussing the effects of social media on development, it's important to understand the difference between a child and a teen when talking about adolescence. So, a child is going to be defined as anyone between 4 and 12 years old, and then a teenager is going to be 13 to 18. And it's also important to note that a teenager is going to use your more social based apps such as TikTok, Instagram, Snapchat, while a child is going to be using more video consumption apps like YouTube that still have social aspects such as commenting and sharing. Um, they spend a lot of time watching adult approved TV shows on platforms such as Hulu, while being given access to YouTube, where content restriction is more difficult. And this makes mature content available to younger children who aren't developmentally ready to be seeing it. Since the COVID epidemic in 2020, approximately 95% of adolescents in the US report using social media daily. Along with that, we have data that says 1 in 5 adolescents in the US have been diagnosed with a mental or behavioral health disorder. An increase in anxiety and depression has grown US public health concerns over the effects social media are having on adolescents. There's a clear connection between the rise of social media and the increase in mental health struggles, and social media is heightener for anxiety and depression in our youth. Toxic stress is again defined as the prolonged activation of a child's stress response. And while we typically see this with cases of abuse or trauma, we can also see this in social media usage. Social media requires a lot of intense social behaviors, and it allows people to express their negative opinions without thinking there's going to be a negative response to it. There's a lot of cyberbullying that creates a lot of stress within a child, and they feel that they aren't doing something right or they aren't good enough. And this amount of stress is going to put a weakening on their learning and memory as they're still in their key phases of development. When high levels of stress are working on a young brain, the brain isn't able to develop correctly. Toxic stress in children impairs the development of their neural connections, which is going to make it difficult for them to build skills such as language and memory. It's also been shown that toxic stress can impair your health problems in the future. A brain that has experienced prolonged periods of stress isn't going to develop properly, and it's going to affect the brain's architecture. And then we can't function properly without a properly functioning brain.
Social media can negatively impact mental health through comparison, pressure, and overexposure to culture, Curated lifestyles. Teens often compare themselves to unrealistic standards related to appearance, success, and popularity. These can lead to feelings of inadequacy and fear of missing out. In addition, cyberbullying and constant feedback through likes and comments can increase anxiety and emotional distress. According to the American College of Pediatricians, these factors can contribute to increased stress levels, depression, and low self-esteem in adolescents. When these stressors are experienced repeatedly, they can begin to affect emotional development and coping abilities. Stress is not always harmful. Short stress can actually help individuals respond to certain challenges. However, when stress becomes consistent and unsupported, it can develop into toxic stress. The American Brain Foundation explains that long-term stress can impair focus, decision-making, and emotional control. For children and teens, repeated exposure to online conflict, comparison, and pressure can keep the body in a prolonged stress response. Over time, this can make it harder for adolescents to regulate their emotions, concentrate in school, and respond to every day in a healthy way. Childhood and adolescence are critical periods for brain development, which makes toxic stress especially harmful. According to the Harvard Center on Developing Child, prolonged stress can disrupt the brain structure and weaken a neural connection. These changes can affect attention, learning, emotional regulation. When children are constantly exposed to stressful online environments without enough support, their brains can prioritize survival responses instead of healthy development. This can lead to a long-term difficulties with behavior, focus, and coping skills. Toxic stress does not only affect mental health, it can also lead to physical changes in the brain and the body. The Nationwide Children's Hospital explains that chronic stress overactivates the body's cortisol system, keeping children in a constant fight or flight state. This can interfere with brain development and increase the risk of learning difficulties with behavioral issues. Over time, these biological changes can make it harder for children to manage emotions, concentrate, and develop healthy coping strategies.
Yeah, and um, it's important to understand that again, too, toxic stress used to be mainly caused by things like child neglect and abuse. And now, in addition to toxic stress being able to cause those physical changes to the brain and impact function, social media is now a contributor to toxic stress and has its own unique ability to change parts of the ways that kids and teens' brains develop. John Hopkins Medicine says that evidence suggests that social media has potential to harm the mental health of children and adolescents, and that frequent social media use could be associated with changes in parts of the brain relating to emotions and learning. Additionally, it can affect impulse control, social behavior, emotional regulation, sensitivity to social punishments and rewards. Social media and unsupervised internet access fill a unique niche in exposing at-risk minors to negative content that even careful parents can struggle with clever kids to get around. And this is something that is impacting a large number of kids, adolescents, and teens. It's not discriminating by location. The internet is accessed easily nowadays from anywhere, and 71% of teens are using YouTube daily, 58% using TikTok, 51% using Snapchat, and 47% using Instagram. So anyone, including strange adults, have the ability to engage with minors online, which can have disastrous consequences. Comment sections, chat rooms, DMs, and game lobbies are all places that minors can be exposed to cyberbullying and inappropriate content that's contributing to their toxic stress responses. And even though many of these apps and sites are supposed to be 13 plus in terms of age restrictions, that doesn't prevent parents from unwillingly or knowingly and willfully allowing younger children access to these types of applications, games, chat rooms, and social platforms. 40% of children aged 8 to 12 are active on or have their own accounts on these sorts of platforms like TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and 9 out of 10 kids aged 8 to 12 have access to these social media apps or gaming apps, even if they don't have their own accounts on a daily basis. And of teens, only 23% reported spending less than 2 hours of time on social media daily, with the average number of daily hours being 4.8. So also 46% of adolescents said that social media has caused them to have lower self-esteem or has contributed to body image issues. And at least 34% of teens also said that they spend multiple hours playing video games daily, with many reporting playing violent video games. So all of these things are contributing to those toxic stress responses and this content feedback loop. And the internet is widespread and access to it is unavoidable. So children and teens' usage needs to be monitored more by parents and guardians to keep it fun and safe and useful and prevent access to that harmful stuff.
While social media can contribute to stress, it's not entirely negative. Research from the World Health Organization suggests that moderate and supervised use can improve peer connection and provide emotional support. Many teens use social media to build friendships, express themselves, or find community with shared interests. These differences lies in how social media is used or whether guidelines and limits are in place. When balanced properly, social media can support development rather than harm it. Next, we've also attached our sources if anyone wants to do a little light reading. But after that, we are going to open up the floor for any questions.
Anybody have any questions? Make sure
I
you're
have
unmuted.
a question.
Yeah.
Would you like what do you guys recommend as like the course of action to help? Like what do you think is a good preventative measure that you would think is most effective to get like kids that are having these negative reactions in terms of stress to stop consuming so much media?
Yeah. I don't know. Does someone else want to answer?
Well, I think, maybe getting them to participate in clubs or after school activities like dance, sports even, it keeps them outside of the house. They're busy with their bodies, they're busy with their hands, so they're not constantly having to search for that stimulant on their phones. So I think doing more outside activities or introducing a new hobby even would help.
And I think that making sure that there's proper monitoring happening and that we are following those age restrictions on the app would make a really big difference.
Yeah, I think monitoring is the biggest thing, and like establishing that relationship with your child so that they feel comfortable coming to you to tell you when there's something that's a little bit fishy, because ultimately, if they're trying to hide things from you, they're going to be able to hide stuff from you. All right.
Should I just ask my question? I've raised my hand. I don't know what's helpful or not.
Yeah, you want to ask a
Yeah, okay.
question?
Yeah, hang on, let me put my hand down. My uh digital hand down. So you had that whole section about how toxic stress is something that is observed in kids in environments where there's abuse or neglect. And I was curious if y'all have any opinion or if in your research for this topic you came across any data, or you just want to guess, like, because there are kids who are still dealing with emotionally abusive or neglectful or, otherwise abusive environments. And those kids are also online. Do y'all have any opinion on what it would be like for those teenagers who are experiencing toxic stress from both directions, from both social media and from, the more typical triggers of that?
Yeah, I don't have any sort of specific numbers that I know of from like the research that we did for this specific project, but I think that that's definitely something that's happening. And I think it's sort of the thing too, where like if they're in that environment where they already don't have the support to cope with the things that they're just experiencing on a daily basis, adding social media on top of that is probably just making it a lot worse for them. And if they don't even have that sort of support system to go to for the normal everyday stuff or in a neglectful situation, then they're also not going to have anybody to go through as a resource for anything that may be happening on the internet.
I also think it's likely that the children going through negative and abusive relationships at home are almost more likely to end up in these problematic social media situations as a way to kind of get away from what they're dealing with at home. So I think that there are definitely ways that they correlate.
Yeah, absolutely. Does anybody else have a question?
I have a question. I was gonna ask, like, based on y'all's research in this project, but also just like general life experience and experience of social media in general, do you have any advice or insight into like what ages it would be appropriate to introduce different levels of social media and like what your kind of process for doing that would be? Like with a child that you were responsible for.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I think it varies person to person and like also depending on the relationship that you have with your kid and like if you trust in their ability to communicate what's actually going on with you. Because I think that like for everybody personally under the age of like 16, I think that your parents should regularly look at like your social media accounts, especially if you have a history of maybe saying the wrong thing to strangers or becoming like if you've had problems with that sort of thing in the past, then I think you need to maybe be put on like an extra high alert watch. But like I don't know, kids are kids and they don't understand a lot of the stuff that adults especially may be saying to them on the internet. So I think that it's just best to let an adult take a look at it. And also like being that adult, if you're the one in that situation, making sure that you're not overreacting to things that are just like normal kid behavior and things that aren't actually harmful, because then it's going to give them that rapport to trust you and want to come to you when there's something that throws them off. I think it's just about having conversations like with each individual kid.
Mhm.
Yeah, I agree with Emma. Even after when they're 16 and older and they can have their own social media, I think, like Emma said, it's important to keep that communication open and really keep it relaxed and like a happy and open environment. That way the kids feel comfortable. Even if somebody says something crazy and they're 17 and they still feel comfortable enough to come to you as the adult in the situation to help them handle it or even just like talk about it through like their emotions a bit.
Awesome. Cool. Well, I think that ends this for us, but thank you guys all so much for coming and for watching our speech. We really appreciate it. And yeah, you are all free to leave now. Thank you guys.
Guys.
Thank you.